Okay, start.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's very good to finally start this meeting, and this is one of the relatively first few of the major meetings that we have related to transportation in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, the personal one that I can remember was, I think, 18,000 buses, which was back in 2019 or early in 2020. So I think this is the first time that we're having a mega level meeting after that, which involves multiple stakeholders. So today's, let me briefly run you through the schedule for today. So firstly, after the welcome address, we have a presentation on the NDC TIA Council's flagship report. This presentation will be done jointly by Sri Prakash ji from TERI and Ms. Urda Aikhorst, who's the project head of the NDC TIA project. And by the way, on Friday, we anyway had the in-person annual planning meeting, which charts the course of the next 1 year for the NDC TIA project. Subsequent to this, we will have Dr. V.K. Saraswat, who's Honorable Member Niti Aayog, who will come and deliver the keynote address. After that, we will have an opening address from Dr. OP, of course. And the unique thing about this particular event, of course, is the roundtable. And Pawan here will take us to the concept of roundtable subsequent to that. Then from our side, from Niti Aayog side, we will have a brief status update on the NDC TIA project, including basically putting together the pointers which will drive the discussion for today. And subsequently, post the recap, the concluding remarks will be delivered by CEO Niti Aayog, Mr. Parmeshwaran Iyer. And now, firstly, I would like to invite Mr. Sudhendu Sinha, who's Advisor Transport and who's really been contributing and supporting these projects to deliver the welcome address. So,
Thank you, Siddharth. A very warm welcome to all the participants and more so the 7 partners of GIZ who are together: GIZ, WRI, ICCT, ITF, SLOCAT, Agora, RN21. That they have been contributing in this NDC TIA initiative in last some 3 years in a major way, I would say. The sessions which are normally planned are very focused and they are meaningful. The suggestions that they come out with, that really, that acts as a kind of lighthouse. I do recount a lot of, I would say, major achievements, that this particular initiative of NDC TIA, that has taken place. And I would say that it's time that it should be gradually matured into a kind of forum up and running so that, this initiative, because it is very, very aspirational, once you say that you want to go in for a zero transport, that is an absolutely aspirational goal. That is not an easy task. Nowhere it has been. So to take that thing forward, be it in the area of dialogue, be it in the area of strategy, be it in the area of pilot, going in, combining the stakeholders together on this area. So precisely in all those areas, I would say that NDC TIA, it has been doing well. And once if together with the kind of achievement, the kind of performance that is going there, if we are able to kind of lift it up to the level of forum, that would be all the more meaningful. Now, you know that our commitment, India's commitment, is very clear. We want to be net zero in the year 2070. And at prime facie, it looks to be very far, but it is not. There's so much to do, because once you start kind of creating a clock on how precisely to achieve that, then you realize that no, it's not so far. So, and when the Prime Minister has so clearly laid down that we have got some 25 years, what he calls Amrit Kal, and there is a purpose behind these 25 years. 25 years means that is the number of years in which a generation can make an impact. So precisely that is why he talks of this 25 years. And within this 25 years, the presumption is that we should be able to create the aspirational transport that we want to go in for. And for India, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that once we know the kind of urbanization that is going fast, if we want our urban centers to be kind of places most livable kind of places, then there is no option than to go in for this particular route that has been so clearly laid out there in that particular diagram. So I must congratulate, again, must compliment to all the participants, all the partners in this particular NDCTI initiative. And let me welcome each one of you. And I am sure that today's council meet, today's deliberation, today you will come out with a lot of solid kind of suggestions that we can go with takeaways, and we are able to kind of implement them in our future initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And without further ado, I would like to invite Sri Prakash ji, who is the Distinguished Fellow at the Energy and Resources Institute, as well as Ms. Surta Aikhorst, who is the Project Head for the NDC Transport Initiative in Asia, to deliver the presentation on NDC-TIA Council's flagship report. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Hope I'm audible. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Sinha. And thank you also for giving us the opportunity to hold this event at NITI Aayog here today in such a big group. And as was being said, for the first time since a long time, to meet face to face. So with today's event, we also would like to take stock on the one hand and start, but on the other hand, start bringing together the different pieces of the decarbonization puzzle that we have been working on under the NDC Transport Initiative for Asia. You know, we've been fortunate to work over the past years with NITI Aayog and in a consortium of 7 implementing organizations under the NDC Transport Initiative for Asia. And in this cooperation have been providing technical assistance to develop and analyze and design different strategies and policy elements for the decarbonization of transport in India. But with this event today, we would like to look a little bit more comprehensively at what can be the contribution of the transport sector to India's 2030 climate targets and also India's long-term decarbonization goal, and starting to have this discussion. So along the same lines, and this is, I think, the presentation that we'd like to present is with that thought of fostering the discourse on the need to decarbonize the transport sector by mid-century. And in Asia, we set up the Council for Decarbonizing Transport in Asia. Joseph. And so this council really came with the idea of 3 different things. And one is to really develop a vision for how a decarbonized transport system in Asia could look like and what is necessary to take us there. How can we achieve this? And by this, using this flagship report really as an impulse to have conversations like we hope to have them today, to engage with decision makers, policy makers, and other stakeholders in this effort, in this aspirational effort, as was being said, to achieve zero carbon transport around mid-century. And so this report, I want to say as a disclaimer, as you know, is a regional report. So we tried to get together different aspects from the region, as you can see here, from different countries in Asia, practitioners from academia, from think tanks, civil society, and finance, to sit together and discuss how could such a transport system look like and what is still missing. And this was something that came up in this discussion. What are the blind spots that we're currently seeing in Asia when it comes to the decarbonization of transport? Because at the same time, we see, of course, that there is a lot of dynamic. A lot is happening already in India and other countries in Asia on the electrification of mobility, but also in other areas like public transport, or in India with the increase of long-distance high-speed rail. And so what are the blind spots? What is still missing in the transport sector? So this is the main idea. And so please take this as a vision for the Asian region. Needs to be, by definition, relatively general, in that the Asia region is, of course, very, very diverse. So we would like to see then later on in the discussion what of these aspects can be relevant in an Indian context and which aspects might not be so relevant for India. But really to say that we see a lot of momentum in Asia. 14 countries in the region have set net zero carbon pledges by mid-century already, but few of them have developed long-term strategies and sectoral action plans yet. And with that, I would like to hand over to Mr. Sri Prakash to present the results of this report. And as you saw, he's a member of the council.
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Uda. Now I have a great pleasure in presenting before you the Council's report. Now this report is a form of the generic one, and it takes care of all the countries, but you see that no country is common to the other, and each country is different. Then what we have tried to do is that we have to try to put everyone together. And in the council, there are the people from the different regions in the Asia. And then we sat together and then tried to find out that what are the main points which would be necessary if we have to have a decarbonization of transportation by 2050. Now 2050 is our vision, that we should have the complete decarbonization of transportation by 2050. I know that it is not easy, but at least we have a vision, and then we also try to find out that what should we do by the policymakers, by the academia, by all the stakeholders to achieve this to prosper. If not by 2050, then can we do it, and can we cover a large distance up to 2050, and so that within few years time, 2060 or so, or even 2070, we achieve the complete decarbonization of transportation. Now, there are the 5 parts of this presentation. One is the council vision. So first, let us talk about the council vision. Then we'll talk about the current status, where we are now, and then what is needed to be done after all to reach this, to achieve our vision, and then what is holding back, because everyone here in this room is very keen and very keenly pursuing to decarbonize the transportation. But there is something which is holding back, and then we are not able to get that kind of the speed which we are looking for. And what are those, we are trying to look into those regions, and then finally what are those enablers which may help in the transformation. Now, this in this diagram, we have tried to find out the vision of the Council for the decarbonization transportation of India in Asia. How of this zero carbon transportation by 2050, that is the complete decarbonization. This is our vision, and at the same time, it should be accessible for all, and it can be, because it can be only when it is convenient, and then it can be accessed by everyone. It is seamless and is also efficient. And as you know, the choice of the transport mode depends on that what is convenient. People look for the convenient mode of the transportation, and that is why it should be also convenient. So that is the zero carbon transport should be integrated, should be seamless, efficient, and convenient. Now, how this can be achieved? Here we have divided between the two, urban and non-urban. Urban, again, the passenger and the freight. A lot of attention is being given towards the passenger. In the urban section, most of the cities are now, since there is also a problem of the air pollution, then we are trying to get into most of the cities are trying to get into electrification of vehicles. Now, electrification of vehicles for both, for passenger as well as for the freight. Now, we have also thought of, that creating hubs for the freight, because in the urban setup, you have to create certain hubs in the cities from where by small trucks or the electric vehicles it can be taken to the destinations. In the non-urban setup, it is a bit easier in the sense that the hubs would continue. You can see that those hubs are there. And what we have installed here is that then between the hubs, or between from the manufacturing point to the consuming points, those hubs should be covered by either by rail or by water. Now, in many of the countries, Asian countries, the railways are present, may not be in that measure that is vibrant like in China or in India. But they are present, and then we can revive it. Similarly, the water transport also, the line transport as well as the coastal shipping. Now, all these things you see can be revived because those are more environment friendly than what we are using today is the road. And for the regional transportation or for the national transportation, it is the rail and water should be used, but for the last mile connectivity or the first mile connectivity, we should go for the electric vehicles. Now, what we envisage here is that by 2050, the transport is fully decarbonized, it is accessible, there are choices, and then a lot of recognition is given to the freight because a lot of carbon emission is taking place through the freight sector. Now, where are we now? Now we are seeing the Asia as one region, but as I already said that no country is similar to the other, and there are also the many points of the divergence. Now, if you see the vehicle ownership in Asia is still very low. Now, but at the same time, in the different economies, the growth is very rapid. In India and China, the motor vehicles are growing at the rate of the 10%, when the world average is roughly about 1 to 3%. Now, in some countries, they have already reached to the same level as the developed countries are. But in most of the countries, the vehicle ownership is still very low. Now you can see the India's position here is somewhere in the middle. Now, we have also seen that the support for the electric vehicles, because of the air pollution, which is also a major problem in the Asian cities, the electrification is catching up. And there is a broad support for the electric vehicles. And also there is a public acceptance for all kinds of the electric vehicles, whether these are electric buses or the small electric two-wheelers or three-wheelers. Now, these very few countries have got the efficient freight policies. A lot of attention is being given towards the passenger transportation, but not for the freight. And at the same time, we see that all the countries in Asia, they are trying to gain the decarbonization, but the progress is different. In some places, it is catching up, and in some places, it is not able to catch. Still, there's a lot of gaps out there. Now, what is needed? In this slide, we'll show that what is needed to get to the zero carbon transport policy and action framework. Now, first of all, we should have a vision. each country should develop a vision for a zero carbon mobility system. When we can achieve this, this could be different. But as I said, that all of us should try to get it by 2050. Now, we have already talked about the vision, what kind of vision we should be. And at the same time, it should also give the employment opportunities. Because unless the employment opportunities are there, nobody would accept the change. Because there is a problem of the unemployment, because almost all the countries are developing this. As well as it should also give the better quality of life, that is, we should have the economic growth. Of course, the sustainable growth, equitable growth. Now, we also realize that the processes are known, largely known, because if you see that there is a lot of public transportation system already exists in these Asian cities. Now, there are also the lot of people are walking and the cycling. So here, normally we talk about the ASIF techniques, that is divide, shift. But here it is more like retaining what we have already had. And then how can we retain? And then again, as I said, that each one is different. And not only countries are different, even the cities are different. Now, a smaller city may not need that kind of the public transport system as a bigger city. Bigger city public transport systems are very important, but not for a smaller city. Because the work trips, which are the most of the transport trips are there, can be covered with this short distance. Our cities are also very dense, and mostly you find that density. That is why work trips are very small. In India, we have seen that almost about 85% of the work trips can be covered in less than 10 kilometers or 5 kilometers. So that is why we should also take care of all this, the retaining the public transport systems, retaining the non-motorized transport. Now, there are certain blind spots. Now, blind spots are basically, as I mentioned, freight. A lot of attention is being given for the passenger, but not for the freight. Then also, normally the development is sectoral. It is not the integrated ones. We should have the integrated planning and then try to achieve and so that there is all those non-economic activities, etc., can be avoided, because infrastructure investment is also very costly. And then we should not focus for the new infrastructures, because it is also costing enormous amount. We should go for the optimizing the existing systems and low cost options. And all these things, these are important to achieve what we are looking for, the decarbonization. Now, this is the last slide which I wanted to show here, which shows that what are the enabling transformation pillars we have identified, and it is generic approach. Each country would have a different approach, and they can always adopt some of them, because this is some kind of a checklist only, and nothing more than less. Now, there are certain foundational principles, and number one is we should act now. There is no time left. Only 28 years are left. And 28 years is as we have seen, the transport changes are very, very slow. That is why its action should be now. And secondly, decarbonization is a prerequisite. Means that you cannot say that it can be postponed any further. In fact, at the same time, it has to be fair and just transition, because we cannot ignore the large population of the poor and vulnerable people. At the same time, it is also important that our target should continue to remain as 2050. We should not try to delay it further, because the moment we delay, then we suffer. And at the same time, the equitable system means that as of now, the infrastructure is more oriented towards the cars. Cars only serve the rich, not for the poor. Then there should be some kind of more accessibility. And finally, all the NDCs are there. Most of the Asian countries have got the NDCs. We should follow, and then they should become some kind of lead to the transport policies. And there are the enablers, the 6 enablers, and then again the 6 blind spots, which I've already talked about. And I hope that this particular slide, which we are showing, would become a basis for today's discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. That was a very insightful presentation, and I'm sure that the pillars that you've mentioned as part of this report will form a very large part of the discussion today. Honorable Vice Chairman is currently in a meeting. In fact, our German colleagues would know with the German BMZ as we speak. So as soon as he gets free from that, he'll be right here. But in the interim, I would request OP sir to deliver his opening address. OP sir, as we all know, has been supporting Niti Aayog across a wide range of areas, be it transportation, be it urbanization, and of course, now lifestyle for environment, which is part of India's updated NDCs as well. OP sir, may I request you to please address.
Thanks, Siddharth. Delighted to be here, and on behalf of WRI, let me say we are really delighted to be part of this coalition, the NDC-PIA, working with GIZ and Niti Aayog. It's been a matter of great pride for us. But very quickly, let me pick up from what Mr. Sudhirji Sinha said. It's always a delight to hear him every time he says something. Today I'm picking up again from something that he said, that India has made a 2070 net zero goal, and it may seem to many that it's still far away. But India is one of the very few countries that has also made certain targets for 2030. What that means is that we can't wait. I mean, our own commitments require us to start right away. So that's one great thing. I think, I would say kudos to the Niti Aayog and others who made this kind of a interim commitment also, that we can't keep sitting till 2050 and suddenly start thinking of 2070. So I think that's a great thing that has happened. And even 2030, the kind of targets that have been set are not easy. And if we get to 2030, we are pretty much on our way to 2070. I think that's a good thing about India's commitments. Coming to transport, I think this report has really laid out what the challenges are, what is the action required, and how can we get there. I think it's laid it out very nicely. Let me, in my own crude way, try and explain how I see all this. Transport decarbonization for me is really should rest on 4 pillars. One that we've been trying to do for many years, that is fuel efficiency. How do you get your travel demand met with less fuel is the technical solution of bringing in greater fuel efficiency. Something that we have been trying to do for a long time, I've been talking about it, really hasn't picked up the way it should have, is what is called a mode shift. That means shifting away from unclean modes to cleaner modes. In very simple terms, that would mean moving away from road transport to rail or to waterways, and from, say, air to rail. That's On one occasion, I was tasked to put together a list of various things happening in the Indian government system on transport towards decarbonization. And I looked at data from all the ministries concerned. And I was very pleasantly surprised to see that a lot is happening. What I did not see is how one ministry is leveraging the work of another ministry to move towards this mode shift. And let me give you an example. If we are building so many high-speed rail corridors, how do we reduce short-haul flights so that people move to high-speed rail? If we are building these dedicated freight corridors, how do we make sure that road transport moves towards rail in these dedicated freight corridors? Now, all this won't happen on its own because each ministry is doing its bit. And to me, that's the role of the Niti Aayog. You are the ones who can champion this. You are the ones who can help make that mode shift happen. So this is the second pillar that bringing about the mode. You have the Bharatmala project, you have the Sagarmala project. I think all of them really are helping you bring about a better mode shift. The third pillar to my mind, which again Mr. Sinha is leading, and I think phenomenal leadership that he's provided, is in moving to cleaner fuels. That is this whole electric mobility mission, plus hopefully in the years to come looking at hydrogen. That's really the third pillar. And to me, a fourth pillar, which I'm seeing early conversations beginning, but which really needs to scale up. And a simple logic for that is every empty seat in a moving vehicle is a wasted resource. So the case I'm trying to make out is for something like mobility as a service. Owning a vehicle is really not the way to do it. How do I own a ride instead of owning a vehicle? So this really is the fourth pillar. We need to build up this a lot more. And these to my mind are the four pillars. The challenges to my mind are most of the ministries are really doing their own bit. It's the fragmentation of the transport space in India has been a big barrier. And that's where I feel that you in the Niti Aayog, the transport wing, phenomenal people, you're the ones who has to take the lead in really bringing all this together. That has been captured in the presentation, is how do you sort of bring out, I'm quoting from the slide itself. I love that statement of momentum is there, but it's patchy. How do you get out of that patchiness? That's where you have to take the lead. We are all with you. Let me stop with that, but I look forward to the discussions in the discussion later. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. OP. It's always a pleasure hearing you, and you've already given us a bit of food for thought, and we've not noted that down, especially the bit about the ministries need to be synchronizing with each other, and that I think is really important, and we would definitely work on that. And I think before we wait for Honorable Member, I think I would like to go to Pawan now, so that you can take us through the concept of the roundtable today. I mean, the concept of the meeting that we are here for, if you could shed light on that for all the participants.
Thank you, Siddharth, and warm welcome, good afternoon, everyone. We have been doing this initiative with support headed by Niti Aayog under the Forum for Decarbonizing Transport, which was set up under the NDCTIA initiative with all the 7 partners. And now we've been regularly doing activities. We had a conclave around financing earlier this year. Then we did a workshop on just transition. We did another workshop with IEA on the EV outlook. And the whole purpose is how do we really strengthen this forum and expand the participation beyond the 7 members also. And that's one of the primary reasons that we have also invited many other organizations today. And the format of the roundtable would be that I would request after the honorable member speaks up, we will have actually Dr. O.P. Agarwal moderate the session. There are a couple of areas that sir, we wanted to also touch upon. That I think we all understand the problem. We also know what needs to be done. But I think how do we really do is some of the things that we need to discuss and deliberate upon. And one of the things that comes to me as an example is the systems thinking approach. And the best example would be what Niti Aayog led effort with CESL has done in the electric bus space. As a system, there was always this procurement individually, every city, every state was doing, but for once, with the GCC model under the phase 2, the whole thinking changed, and we saw for the first time after many years, renewed enthusiasm to really bring about electric buses. That was one of the biggest changes that happened. And another system level thinking is a change was this whole aggregation model, again initiated by Niti Aayog, where 5 cities participated in the first round with 5,500 buses, and that really opened up the vision for 50,000 buses, and I think the numbers are only going to go bigger. So the whole system level thinking, which is basically moving away from just doing initiatives in silos, but to really bring about a whole shift in the ecosystem can be achieved, and this has been demonstrated when we put our minds and hearts together. So can we really look at identifying some of this kind of approaches and solutions through this roundtable discussion? That is something we want to explore. Of course, the topic is decarbonizing the transport sector, and would request each of the members, participants here to really share their thoughts and solutions, which then you would document as a proceeding from this, and with support from Niti Aayog, take it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Pawan.
Thanks very much, Pawan. And I think before that, we also wanted to have a short presentation from Niti Aayog's side, of course. Can we put up those slides of the other presentation? So basically, I mean, a lot of project partners over here present today, they're already part of the NDC-TIA consortium, but there is a fair number of people who are not aware of this project, not this one, the other one. And we just wanted to take you through a brief recap of the work that we are doing as part of the NDC-TIA project, thanks to all of our project partners, of course, at NITI. So here's a brief project overview, and we also have a sort of way forward in this presentation, which is what the own thoughts of the transport vertical were, and it'll be very interesting, of course, to see how this ties in with the one slide that Sri Prakash ji showed us, which had the various initiatives of the report. So firstly, as we know, there are actually two separate projects. One, of course, is the NDC Transport Initiative for Asia, where the aim is to basically bring about this shift towards clean mobility in India, and develop a comprehensive kind of framework, which is why as part of this project, we've done easily about 30 to 35 deliverables. And Dr. Mitra, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think we've probably done more than those number of deliverables thanks to these projects. And the second project, which also feeds into the NDC Transport Initiative for Asia, is the DTI, which is delivered by the International Transport Forum. So this is the Decarbonizing Transport Initiative, where basically the idea is we are building, we are basically building a model that allows us to simulate different policy scenarios to be able to see how we are on track to meet our NDCs. But the broad goals of both these projects, of course, is at the India level and of course at the Asia level. How do we really ensure that we meet our NDCs or our intended NDCs, so as to speak? Now, interestingly, the consortium of these project partners, of course, we've got GIZ, and we're very pleased to have all partners from GIZ present today. WRI has always been a strong pillar of support, not just in this project, but even otherwise. We've got Agora, we've got SlowCat, we've got International Council on Clean Transportation. Amit is right here. They've done a wonderful study on battery swapping. You've got REN21, we've got International Transport Forum, and of course, academically, we've got TERI and Wuppertal Institute supporting us. And this entire, of course, project is funded by the International Climate Initiative of the German government, and we're very thankful for that, of course. If we look at the work streams we've discussed, and the internal calculation that we did was it's actually not 50, but it's actually over 100 plus. If we combine all of the deliverables, the launch events, and the research papers that have taken place. So since the start of this project, I mean, it started in 2019, but 2020 is when it picked up pace. And those are all research publications, blogs, individual reports, event launches, dialogues for decarbonization of, for financing the decarbonization of transport, and so on and so forth. And we're very happy that in just 2 to 3 years of these projects, we've been able to do so much. And we look forward to doing much more as we go ahead with, with these projects. And finally, I would also like to sort of bring, put a bit of light on Niti Aayog's thinking as well. So a couple of things in our internal meetings, our meetings with the leadership team of NITI, some of the areas that we've looked at is that what is the next logical step with all the data and insights that we've accumulated or generated? Do we put this into a long-term strategy? Do we put this in a form of pilot to actually test out whether these things are actually working? And how do we really integrate this with, of course, India's NDC commitments and COP26 targets? Because one thing that we don't want is too many different piecemeal approaches, as Dr. O.P. rightly mentioned. It has to be a comprehensive strategy, firstly. Secondly, is how do we integrate this with the LIFE initiative or the Lifestyle for Environment initiative. This was launched by the Honorable Prime Minister on World Environment Day. And even prior to that, the clarion call for this was given by the Honorable PM at the COP26 platform. And the whole idea is that we cannot really talk about reducing emissions at the aggregate level or at the macro level until and unless we also inherently transform our own lifestyles. And a very big part of that is, of course, public transportation. And we are very glad that these projects feed a lot into how we can improve public transportation. Third, of course, is where there is relatively less conversation is how do we tackle the hard to abate sector? So what do we do really with heavy duty freight? What do we do with civil aviation? What do we do with shipping? Because the amount of momentum that the EV movement has already generated now, thanks to the efforts of the e-mobility team, Sudhendu sir here, Amitabh Tan sir who was here, and of course the entire Niti Aayog team now with Parmeshwaran Iyer sir leading it. The idea is how do we ensure that the hard to abate sectors are not really left out? The fourth thing that we're looking at is how do we really leverage competitive federalism? One of the things that we've really seen work in Niti Aayog or the Niti Aayog model is we've not just been able to foster cooperative federalism, but also competitive federalism. So what we've done in the cases of aspirational districts program or the school education quality index and many such indices that we've launched is that we are actually giving states or districts the incentive to compete with each other. Right? And that's why today, if you look at 112 aspirational districts where we've brought together competitive federalism, I mean, there are UNDP reports which say that these districts are actually doing better than the state averages because we're actually putting this in the public domain and that's allowing them to compete with each other. So how do we do this in the field of clean mobility? The fifth, of course, is most important, which is mobilizing clean finance. I mean, there are estimates, not just overall, that India would need about USD 250 billion, upwards of that every single year if we want to really go strong on our goals. And that also requires innovative instruments. And, mostly the focus is around the projects which are delivered by the government. But increasingly, the decarbonization has to be driven by the private sector. So how can we ensure that the private sector gets access to that kind of finance, whether it's through de-risking, whether it's through hedging mechanisms? World Bank has done some very good work with the e-buses, by bringing together a hedging mechanism. So perhaps that as well. And of course, this was something that Pawan discussed in the meeting on Friday, and that's interesting because how these meetings feed into each other. Is the feedback that he was getting is how do we build the ongoing and completed government initiatives into the modeling exercises that are undertaken? Because you've got these broad level modeling exercises that are done. But how do you feed the more specific information, right? Like Dr. OP said, there's dedicated freight corridor, high-speed rail, you've got regional rapid transit system, you've got the Indian Railways net zero goal, you've got ethanol blending, where we've already achieved the target ahead of the timeline. So the question now is that how do we really, not just from a future perspective, build a coherent strategy, but also take into account what has already happened so that we are able to use the evidence and data from that to drive our further initiatives. So we hope that this way forward, in addition, of course, to the broad set of recommendations that Sri Prakashji highlighted, would help us in taking our discussion today forward. So I think over to Pawan and OP sir now for moderating this till the time Saraswat sir joins us. Thank you.
Thanks. Pawan has given me this task of moderating this discussion. Frankly, I don't think I need to say much to begin. This is what you've been hearing. The two basic questions are, what are the priority areas for decarbonizing transport in India? And what should be the role of the Niti Aayog in that direction? I think in my earlier intervention, I gave my thoughts, but let's hear this around the table. If you permit, what I'll do is just go around the table and at the end come to Mr. Sinha and say, let me give him the last word on how do you either summarize or what is the message you take out of it? What are your thoughts on that? So where do we start? I want the first volunteer and then that will be the starting point. Okay, Amit. Good.
Thank you, sir. So a couple of points which I thought I will share, and since I'm the first person, I'll be slightly more broader in my comment. So one is that if you look at the heavy-duty vehicle segment, that represents almost 5% of global fleet, and it accounts for almost 40% of on-road greenhouse gas emission. And if you look at the Indian numbers, almost 65% emission from the transport sector comes from heavy-duty vehicle segment. It's also the largest oil consumption sector in India, followed by aircraft, passenger car, and two-wheeler. So one idea is to look at electrification of heavy-duty vehicle segment. And there are various methods we can go about doing it, but I thought that I'll pass one idea to look at the heavy-duty vehicle segment electrification as one big idea. Second is if we look at the off-road vehicle segment. So India is the largest manufacturer of
Namaskar, good afternoon. Sorry, I have been in multiple meetings. So.
Yes, sir. So this is the first idea was to look at the electrification of heavy-duty vehicle segment. The second was that India is the largest manufacturer of tractors, and almost 12-13% is what we export. We are really looking at, and if you look at the emission side, almost 61% of particulate matter and 56% of NOx emission comes from the tractors when you look at the off-road vehicle category. Electrification of tractors is another big opportunity, and we have one demonstration vehicle now existing. And we did some life cycle assessment and found that electric tractor is almost equivalent to, in terms of TCO, a diesel tractor. So that's the second idea. The third idea was we have seen globally that fuel economy standards have played an important role in scaling up EV uptake. So Bureau of Energy Efficiency is now coming up with two important studies. One is the fuel economy standards for heavy-duty vehicles and as well as the light-duty vehicles. So if NITI can be involved in that, bring some of the high-level perspective and guidance, I think that will be a very important study to further accelerate electric mobility uptake. So those are 3 points from my side.
Thanks, Amit.
Thank you, Amit. Actually, sir, we had just started the roundtable discussion, but now I would like to invite Honorable Member NITI Aayog, Dr. V.K. Saraswat. So Dr. Saraswat has had over 4 decades of illustrious service with the Government of India, and prior to becoming a member of NITI Aayog, Dr. Saraswat was the Secretary of the Defence Research and Development Organization, where he's been credited with the indigenous development of some of our best defense capabilities, the missiles, whether it's Prithvi, Dhanush, Prahar, Agni, and he's the recipient of 2 of India's highest civilian honors, which is the Padma Shri and the Padma Bhushan. At NITI Aayog, and as member who's in charge of energy and transport amongst various other verticals, Dr. Saraswat has been at the forefront of driving various different technologies across the energy and transport sector. So, sir, over to you, sir.
Thank you for making the introduction short. So I get sometimes very much worried when it goes on and on and on. Yes, I have been working after coming to NITI Aayog on energy sector, transport sector in a big way. And just now I'm coming from a meeting where we discussed hydrogen, green hydrogen and things like that. But I'll make a small short presentation. I hope all of you can bear with that. With the economic development and exponential increase in the four-wheelers, we certainly will drive the future growth of the passenger transport. All of us know that. The shift to four-wheelers will significantly impact the transport sector's energy demand and the emissions. The rising income levels, the demand for domestic air travel will continue to increase at a fast pace in the next few decades. The dominance of trucks, I just listened to the last dialogue which was going on, of trucks in India's freight transport segment means that this transport segment would be the most challenging one for India to tackle from a decarbonization perspective due to the limited availability of the sustainable alternatives, particularly in this segment. If you look at the carbon emissions produced by the transport sector, the green one shows you the freight, and so-called grey/blue is the passenger one. You can see the trucks being, on the highest side. 2020, the direct emissions that we call as the tailpipe emissions by the transport sector were in the region of 272 million tons. And the road sector, including passenger and freight, dominate transport emissions, accounting for almost 92% share as far as emissions are concerned. Next. Now the emissions can be divided into a number of ways. So I have been discussing with our expert here, Mr. Sinha and others, that we should look at well to wheel and well to tank, because sometimes it's always If you talk only tailpipe emissions, it sometimes gives a distorted picture. So we should look at well to tank first. And if you look at that, you will notice that the carbon dioxide emissions, even in well to tank kind of a system, CO2 emissions, because of the energy coming from the grid in a big way, even in electrical vehicle is a problem, highest, whereas gasoline, diesel, compressed natural gas, hydrogen are on the lowest. High well to tank energy use to produce electricity causes higher CO2 emissions for the electricity pathway. That is the present situation. Higher CO2 emissions for hydrogen associated with hydrogen production from natural gas via steam reforming. Also, that is the reason, because when you reform this natural gas, you produce hydrogen. Next one you take is the tank to wheel emissions, and that is where the electric mobility, the HEV and PHEV, all of them score, because they practically give you the zero emissions. These are the tank to wheel emissions. Hybrid vehicles having higher fuel economy have lower CO2 emissions associated with the vehicle operations, because hybrid vehicles do use the electricity for driving, if not fully, for the partial of the times. And plug-in hybrid, which has got the advantage of you can using the electricity, the grid from charging as well as otherwise, have lower CO2 emissions as compared to hybrids because of the operation of electric drivetrain during charge depleting mode, which has zero carbon emissions during operation. We got a very detailed study carried out by our Indian Institute of Science team of experts, and some of the graphs which I am presenting are the outcome of their study. Next one is well to wheel emissions. If you look at well to wheel emissions, there again you will see the plug-in hybrid vehicles have higher CO2 emissions associated with production of electricity, because again you are charging it from the grid, and leading to the overall higher well to wheel carbon dioxide emissions. Conventional drivetrains have higher CO2 emissions, that is well known. Even though CO2 emissions associated with vehicle operations phase for hydrogen fuel cell vehicles and battery electric vehicles are zero, the well to wheel CO2 emissions are high because of the high emissions associated with hydrogen and electricity production. This was the point today just now when we were discussing with the German collaboration. There was a meeting with India, German on green hydrogen. The point was the definition of green hydrogen is exactly how clean is the electric mobility. Definition of that. When you only look at well to wheel, you will realize how clean is the system. So, for example, now the Germans are saying that if you have only 5% dip from the grid in producing the green hydrogen, then only it is green. That means your grid is almost 95% decarbonized. That is the kind of standard they are setting up. And that's going to be a huge problem for countries like India, where our grid is not going to be decarbonized as much. So tomorrow, when we produce green hydrogen and use the grid for electrolysis, then you will have a problem in selling that green hydrogen. I think the same concept is going to come, if not today, but tomorrow, when the climate effect of the electric mobility will be considered. Ultimately, why we are doing all this? It is basically to contain the climate effect. Next, please. The well-to-wheel emission scenario till 2030. Actually, there are two number of graphs are there. Basically, what we have done is the current situation and then conservative estimates what will happen in 2030, which is shown with the other green color. And the 2030 is an aggressive curve. In our own Niti Aayog, we have modeling teams which are actually doing modeling of the energy scenario. So energy forecasting conducted by considering two scenarios for the year 2030, one conservative scenario by Niti Aayog, and second one is an aggressive scenario proposed by CEA, which assumes that India is able to meet the NDC targets under the Paris Agreement of 40% renewables in the electricity mix by 2030. That is the kind of assumption we have made. So there is a dramatic increase in the well-to-wheel efficiency in the battery electric vehicle for the 2030 target. You can see that by 2030 it is coming down to less than 100. For the same reason, the plug-in series hybrid shows the highest well-to-wheel efficiencies for this scenario, with the diesel-powered plug-in hybrid showing the highest efficiency. Next, I would like to give you some very maybe this team may not be able to digest some of the points which I am making, but these are points to be considered. For example, impact of accelerated introduction of EV on employment on Indian automobile industry. I don't know whether anybody has made any study, but we did that in Niti Aayog. There are around 880 registered tier 1 companies with staff of average 100% manufacturing automotive components. More than 1,000 registered tier 2 and tier 3 support industries and 1,000 automobile distribution centers, service centers with staff of minimum 20% manufacture automatic components. So what will happen? Rapid introduction of EV will cause serious industrial disruptions because ICEV has 6,000 components while EV has only 400 components. So this will lead to closure of automotive component industry and revenue losses. Impact of EV on employment. An ICEV plant of India employs about 2,000 to 2,200 people for 300,000 engines per annum kind of a production, whereas a plant manufacturing 300,000 motors per annum will employ less than 100 to 150 people. That is a kind of reduction in manpower. So the impact of accelerated EV induction will lead to cumulative job losses in the tune of 1.2 to 1.5 million by 2030. Next one is the impact of accelerated introduction of EV on petroleum and auto industries. Now, this study why I did, because we had made certain targets that by such and such time, by 2025, 50% of the EV will get introduced. By 2030, I don't know whether it's 60% or 70% EV will get introduced. So when you do this kind of goal setting, it has got impact. For example, introduction of EV on petroleum and auto industry. Very recently only we have invested a lot of money on the IC engines. We are implementing BS6. Oil and marketing companies have invested up to about 32,000 crores in bringing down the levels to BS6 today. All electrified two-wheeler, three-wheeler by 2025 will hit refineries in terms of reduced production and less return on the BS6 investment. Automobile manufacturers end up investing about 70,000 crore for bringing BS6 compliant products. And alternate fuel programs like ethanol blending will also get adversely affected. More than 50% auto component manufacturing companies will have to either diversify or close the shop. So what is the answer? What are the options we have? Now I'm trying to give you a strategy for transiting from IC engine vehicles to electric vehicles over a long run. And electric also we'll have to discriminate between electric or fuel cell based vehicle or battery cell based vehicle. That is the point we have to say. For example, best option to reach battery driven EV is through the hybrid vehicle route. Hybrid vehicles will reduce emissions by about 46% as compared to IC vehicles. Hybrid vehicles will utilize the BS6 fuel, which will support recovery of investment by oil and marketing companies and ensure uninterrupted production of IC engine vehicles. Time for auto industries to diversify into EV, leading to less disruption and creation of an ecosystem for EV component. One thing one has to understand, today if you see two-wheelers and three-wheelers where most of the EV has already penetrated in a big way, the import content is significantly high. In fact, it's about 80 to 90% of the items which go into making two-wheelers, three-wheelers is high. And mainly because localization of that has not taken place. Neither the cells have been localized, nor the drivetrain is localized, nor the batteries. So as a result, if you bring the hybrid today, the same automobile industries which will have the common elements, common aggregates which are there with the normal IC engines and the electric vehicles will get into accelerated localization mode. Similarly, use of alternate fuels to reduce import and emissions. That is another strategy. Presently, bio-CNG, ethanol and methanol are alternative fuel available with India, and in future green hydrogen will be available through renewables, which will lead to reduction in emissions by almost about 40%. Methanol is a hydrogen carrier which can replace petrol and diesel. Methanol combustion leads to no particulate matter and reduce NOx and reduce SOx. Indian companies are already demonstrating use of methanol in two-wheeler and three-wheeler. It can be produced from coal, biomass, municipal solid waste, stranded natural gas, and so on. Indigenous methanol can be produced at an economic price of anything ranging between 15 rupees to 30 rupees per kg. Methanol-based fuel cell reformer. Now, a reformer is one which can reform methanol into carbon dioxide and hydrogen. And hydrogen then can be used as a fuel for running the what we call as the fuel cell for battery. And that is where the answer lies for the point which you have raised about what do we do with the commercial trucks. Methanol fuel cell driven e-mobility is the diagram shown here. Is methanol is produced, as I mentioned to you, from whatever source. Then you have the reforming done. You take the reformed hydrogen, carbon dioxide is captured, and so that there is no emission in the atmosphere. Now you have a fuel cell stack. You run that through that either with say PAM fuel cell or any other fuel cell. Then you generate electricity, and that will be able to run your commercial vehicles. So that is the kind of solution we have. And the advantage is for a car battery which weigh about 60 kg, while methanol fuel cell will weigh only about 18 kg. If you talk in terms of carbon dioxide emissions from a fuel cell EV, it is about 2.7 grams per kilometer as compared to 20.9 grams per kilometer as far as the EV is concerned. Now you must be wondering why I am saying, again I am talking of well to wheel to that side. Methanol offers huge diversity. Methanol can be converted to electricity with an efficiency of almost about 75%. Hydrogen from methanol can be produced by an onboard reformer to run a fuel cell in commercial vehicles. That is one possibility we can have. So I have given this kind of a strategy for transition to the full what is should be there. For example, in 2020, we have more than 95% coming from the IC engines and about 5% coming from the EV. If you go to 23, I would recommend 75% IC, then 15% will be EV and about 10% in hybrid. If you go to 2030, the IC engines will come down to 45%, EV will increase to 30%, and fuel cell vehicles will come in about 10%, and hybrid should go to about 15%. When you go to 2035, there is an increase in hybrid, there is a reduction in IC engines, EV remains almost same, but FCV increases. Ultimately, by about 2040, you have EV, FCV and hybrids meeting the requirement. At the end of the day, when you are completely going, IC engines will reduce to about 5%. It will still remain in some extent, but most of it will be FCV. There are the fuel cell vehicles using hybrid, and some of them will continue to remain as the hybrid. That is a kind of suggestion which I have made. For roadmap for e-vehicle, hybrid, fuel cell and IC engines, all of them transiting together, increase ethanol blending up to 20%, which the government of India has already taken the decision, and we want to introduce 15% of methanol blending. Increase use of bio-CNG through increased production, adaptation and distribution network. Use methanol as an alternative fuel in the following forms like M15, MD15. Now diesel also can be blended with the methanol, so you can reduce the diesel emissions. M100 or DME based diesel drop-in fuel DME, or convert methanol to hydrogen as I mentioned to you for the commercial vehicles. Fuel cells, we have a major problem today. Promote methanol production from coal, MSW, standard natural gas to use as a hydrogen carrier for fuel cell e-mobility. Funds should be provided and incentives should be given for R&D and production of the fuel cells. Our present problem is again fuel cells are not produced in the country, import is taking place and cost is a major issue. Methanol fuel cell reformer, I just want to say that with the efforts of Niti Aayog and our academic institution, India is able to now design and develop its own fuel reformer, and probably industry would be very happy to take the technology and produce in numbers. We have planned investment on charging infrastructure. We have to do that because if you want to have e-mobility, and we need to have major infrastructure investment, and I think our FAME scheme is already working on that. Secondary storage for grid balancing is required. Transition to smart grid is a must for the e-mobility. Indian industry must be able to grow to mitigate the higher import cost of the balance of the battery system. through sectoral schemes like government and promoting domestic lithium-ion battery cell production, for which already the PLI scheme has been introduced now. Local manufacturing capabilities coupled with battery recycling need to be developed through an effective and focused government program. That is very important. Otherwise, we'll run out of lithium problem. Guidelines on the Indian standards on safety aspects of battery for EV need to be developed. These standards will provide manufacturing and testing guidelines of the battery as per the Indian needs. The kind of unsafe problems which we have faced in terms of accidents, I think they need certification and standard access. Hybrid vehicles, to promote manufacturing of hybrid vehicle in India, we have to reduce the GST at par with the EV vehicles. Then you will be able to promote more and more hybrids. Viability gap funding to be provided for setting up infrastructure for manufacturing of batteries, motor, power splitters, converters, and so on. And setting up at least 1 giga factory for production of what we call as the battery production plant and the cells which should be done. Last point, this is the summary of that. Supporting hybrid vehicle approach will safeguard investment on BS6, reduce job losses in auto component industry, and promote healthy growth of automobile sector. This will ensure a smooth transition to electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles regime in the country. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We are going with a kind of roundtable on a very, very focused approach that how this NDC TIA, which is globally one of the, I would call it, most impactful study, regionally definitely. So how precisely how we should be going ahead with in times to come. So that is what the topic is. What are the challenges which has not been addressed to? Where exactly we should be extending forward. So these are the issues that is being discussed in your absence. Rather, it was just we were going ahead with. Dr. O.P. Agrawal is not, I'm sure you know him. He has got the most simple solution for all the complex problems. That is how he is known for. He is the one. So he is the one that's taking it forward. And the first Amit, you heard him, sir?
I heard him partially.
Yes. So he was
very good points. What?
Yes. So basically, that the heavy-duty commercial vehicles
is our major concern.
Now it's time that we have gained confidence with respect to the two-wheelers and the three-wheelers and the buses. It's time that we extend ourselves in Indian context more so in that particular area. Yes. Please carry forward.
I have to leave for next meeting. I have to go for it. Any questions which you have directly to me? Because I have another commitment.
In the discussion, this will come up.
No, what I said on that, if you have any points or any other point which you feel like.
Any questions, anyone?
If there's any question on Dr. Saraswat sir's presentation, then you can ask them now.
Anyway,
sir, Dr.
Yes, sir, please. Yeah.
We had an opportunity already to speak in the previous session
yes,
in Germany. So my name is Winfried Damm from GLZ, and
I saw you on that.
Yes.
I
am heading the energy cluster of GLZ in India. I'm wondering, Mr. Saraswat, whether you feel that hybrid cars are not becoming too expensive for India. And I feel that India deserves the cheapest, or let's say the least costly option. And nowadays, e-vehicles only, plainly battery-based, might turn out to be the cheaper option, or the less costly option. The same is true probably even for large trucks. So in Germany right now, they agreed on having megawatt charging systems placed on. So even large trucks up to 40 tons might run only on batteries.
I think it's a discussion point. We need to discuss this in totality. When you talk of investments, and then you look, taking into account the investment on charging infrastructure, taking into account the investment of setting up factories for setting of the batteries, and also then the overall cost comes out. As far as you imagine that you have a very strong IC engine manufacturing system in the country today. We produce the cheapest cars in the world. You know that. India produces the cheapest cars in the world. If we can produce the aggregates for the electric vehicles, which are common with the hybrid vehicles at the same scale at which we are producing the automobile components, I have no reason to believe that the hybrid vehicles will be equally competitive in cost compared to the EV. Reason is, except the costs which are going to be there on the large size batteries and things like that would come down drastically, and the rest of the costs are common. Second thing is, Government of India is now providing the incentives as far as the e-vehicles are concerned. If I provide the same, as I mentioned to you, if I provide the same incentives to the hybrid vehicle, you will be able to come within about, suppose a car costs 5 lakhs, it will be 5.5 or 6 lakhs, that kind of a thing. But with the added advantage of 35 to 40% reduction in the emissions.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? So, just one more question. So
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to make a point. I mean, the points that you raised about EV being maybe having more carbon footprints and methanol being better, maybe a right point.
Well to wheel.
Yeah, well to wheel. But there is another aspect that we also have to look into when we make this policy, because the energy sector is very important, not just for policies in energy sector, also for the macroeconomy. So if we look at this oil, where transport sector is the largest, one of very dominating user of oil. And most of the times when the economy has slowed down, has been hit when there has been this oil price hikes. And so this is a very weak point for the Indian economy, when its dependence on oil is so huge, and whenever there is an oil spike and then the economy slows down. So therefore, shifting away from that, even by not going to hybrid, going for EV or some non-oil option, may have this huge benefit for India. Which,
Do you know one thing, that your dependence on oil is equivalent to your dependence now on lithium-ion battery import? You are importing today 85,000 crores worth of fuel, crude oil. And if you go for even 50% of your automobile sector getting into e-mobility, your per year import will be in the region of 38,000 crores. And even if you start manufacturing your batteries here, assuming that you will be able to make huge investment and manufacture cells at the same rate at which China is supplying it to you today, you will have to understand that lithium, cobalt and some of the other materials are not part of India's natural resource. So again you will have an import on that. Tomorrow when you are going to make electrolyzers even for hydrogen, the iridium, the palladium, all the materials you will be importing. So that is one part. And as far as the impact of the global volatility of the crude oil is concerned, based upon geopolitical situations as happened in the case of Russia and Ukraine, it is very clear that even the battery cells which were available for X price have become 2.5x. So the impact is not just on the oil, it is on the overall oil-based economy, which cannot be avoided, whether you like it or not. Gas, India is also talking of gas-based economy today. Our LPG, our LNG, all of them will continue to be imported. So gas and oil-based economy, merely by energy transition, cannot be completed. You know that. You know that a green thing is only green if the grid is 90% decarbonized. Your electric vehicle is green only if grid is 90% decarbonized. Work for that without import. Work for that with less emissions, and then we will discuss the point. Okay?
Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, sir.
That very interesting presentation.
Yes.
But I'm also a little conscious of the time. So what I would like to do, instead of just going around everyone on the table, let me call on one person from each of the partner organizations, and then Yeah, so we've heard Amit from ICCT. Let me move to ITDP. Aswati,
Yeah, that's
go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we had a great presentation today, and one of the points that Pawan had made was also about how Niti Aayog played such an important role in aggregating, especially the electrification of public buses. I think I'm loud, but in case since they do have this technology. So I think one thing that we're missing out here is, especially when we speak about buses, the private buses also play a great role, especially coming from Tamil Nadu, for example. So when we look at the number of buses, if there are 1.2 lakh STU public buses, there are 19 lakh private buses. But we're not speaking about the subsidies for these private buses, or how we're going to be aggregating or helping them transition. So that, I think, is one important point that we do need to discuss. Secondly, I feel like we had a great presentation, and Sri Prakashji very, very nicely spoke about how there is such a high shift, or there's a 10% increase in private motor vehicle use. So while we speak about decarbonization, isn't it also important to speak about how can we reduce this through maybe pricing measures, maybe more strategic and progressive travel demand measures as well? Because we do want to have lesser number of ICE vehicles, but if we can also reduce the number of electric vehicles, electric private vehicles on our roads, that will also mean lesser electricity that is being consumed by them. So that would be the second point that I would like to sort of touch upon. And the last one is all of this requires behavioral change. We look at a lot of focus on having infrastructure, having the right subsidies. How do we really make our citizens make the shift? So what are we thinking about those? And with that, I'd like to give that a name. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Aswati. Can I now look at Anumita, CST?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Or maybe use that mic.
This has so far been a great conversation, and exactly what we need right now to move forward. So a couple of things that's coming to my mind that I'm looking at, particularly the Niti Aayog's role. There is so much, the agenda is so big that we can't even begin to identify each one of them. But there are some critical interventions that are needed today, because transportation decarbonization being talked about for a very long time. The strategies, there is more or less a growing consensus today among everyone agrees on what needs to be done. But where we really that holding back what we talked about is that we still do not have a clear operational plan. But how do you make it happen? So here I would like to comment on two key areas. One, the technology aspect of change, which is that as we've seen, that one, we know that field economy is going to be one big propeller. Now, are we utilizing these instruments effectively enough to drive the market or not? And it should not be a missed opportunity. So right now there is a huge lag in the fuel economy regulations. We are developing them right now for heavy duty and for commercial vehicles, but two-wheeler is left out as of now. And the car regulations are very weak. It cannot drive electrification. And if we have learned from the European experience, that it is a fuel economy regulation that has really driven the EV market. So really creating the right benchmark in the market to catalyze the market, we should design the instruments adequately. Secondly, is that the electric vehicle policy itself. A lot is happening. I mean, it's amazing to see the whole energy today and the way the policies are taking shape at the central level, at the state level. But yet again, there is just an ad hoc listing of what needs to be done, particularly at the state level. And there are, except for this little bit of this fiscal support, we do not have in the market today that what is the long-term visibility for the EV roadmap, for the industry to follow. So for industry, therefore, it's a very short time horizon, and it does not bring the confidence in the market for the kind of investments that we are looking at. So we need that policy certainty in the market, and therefore to have industry as a partner in this will be very critical, with policy targets mandate. The other side of the story is the mobility story, which is very, very important. And like OP, as you said, that the modal share, at the end of the day, we need to see that shift. Now here I would expect that if today the states and the cities are working with so many different plans, there is a climate change plan, there is a clean action plan, there is an environment management plan that the states, cities and districts are preparing. And all of them have transportation as a sector in them. But there is no clear guidance on how do you define the intervention points. Because the transportation intervention, one is at a macro, big infrastructure level intervention. And the other one, which influences the urban community, that is the hyper-local urban design level intervention. Now, but we have not been able to understand and convey to the governments how to projectize, implement, and create a funding mechanism for all the different pieces of interventions that are needed today to be able to drive the change and bring the scale. So in fact, that is where we are using today in the mobility programs. The scale is very, very limited. And the final, there are many points, but at the final one point I would say that it's important to create the matrix. The last, if you have seen the emission gap report of Visual and the last one, is very interesting. As part of the economic stimulus package globally, they have actually identified transportation projects where investments have happened that is supply driven and those which are demand driven. So it essentially means that for all transportation projects, we should have a matrix to even estimate that how much locking in of carbon is going to happen because of that intervention and how much unlocking is possible, and take the decision in an integrated way. So therefore, the transport decarbonization strategy will become workable and will be a reality only if we make it measurable and verifiable. But at this moment, we do not know how to do that. We have not even developed those indicators to measure the changes in the mobility transition.
Thanks, thanks, Anumita. Very interesting. I have some comments to make, but very good point that you make. Let me now come to Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation. I have Ruchir, Narayan, whoever would like to intervene.
Thank you. Am I audible? Quick coming on this topic, just looking at, first of all, we all agree that there is a pathway which is very well done and we all have talked about it. Now, in between, in short and mid-term, we see things like whether it's hybrid or pure electric. I think debate will mature it. But overall, a couple of things are very critical. We all have to agree and act on it. As long as there is an electric powertrain in there and elements associated with that, a country like India has to be very clearly focused on it. Now, whether even as per today's discussion, we are seeing hybrid electric, there's a complete electric powertrain and battery system all there. So as far as tier 1 and tier 2, there is going to be full focus, efforts, encouragement, everything has to be provided for that matter. All the effort of whether new employments to get generated, type of R&D what is needed to get done, type of infrastructure facilities which are to be created, all that is going to be there. Adding to that, a complexity gets added when we make it hybrid. So there's going to be much more need of talent pool and all that. So one end is bringing a skilling and knowledge base here in India at all levels, starting from production, engineering, field service, support, everywhere. So there's a huge work to be done out there. The second element which comes to me on the deployment and this side is we have to have very clearly effort going all the way to cities, geographies, smaller pockets. Over and above the federal, what we're talking about, various policy initiatives here, taking it to the city and action place to encourage transitioning happening out there in defined 5 years of intervals, say, or 4 years, 3 years, whatever is really measurable and there is impact which shows visibility. The third and last point, what comes to my mind is overall when we look at integration of various modal shift. I think more and more effort and this kind of a meeting what we see today, maybe once in every quarter, it is what is needed today. Thank you. I'll stop.
Thanks.
No, just a minute, sir. I think this hybrid thing is causing some problems here. So maybe this has origin from this particular presentation. So I must settle it, I enter into a lot of arguments and discussion with my members here. And the only place where I don't enter into argument is this year. This, when it comes to hybrid versus EV. And, if diversity is good, so is divergent of opinion. So I have my own way. And my electric team who are sitting in linear fashion there, none of them agree to hybrid. So it is pure electric only. So let me settle it before it causes any flutter. So with the departure, hybrid goes off. Now we are
I think a lot of what came out in the slides and a lot of the data, at least to me, is new. So what I would suggest is that could be circulated. All of us can get thinking about it. There are certain good points that have been made. And even while listening to that, one thought that came to my mind is we've always been talking of what share of vehicles become electric. Suppose we shifted the argument a little bit and we said what share of vehicle miles become electric. The moment you do that, you're building a strong case for buses and paratransit to become electric, but let personal vehicles remain where they are. So I think there's a lot of thinking that needs to go into it. The data is all new to me, but it's worth debating. It's worth debating. You've put your plan clear. I'm probably more in agreement with you, but I think let's take that as a divergence of opinion. But with that, can I move to Slokat, Angel, Mark, whoever, Angel? Mark, whoever, whichever, Mark.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here and see you particularly. I think I want to make 5 points. The announcement of India's net zero target is one of those moments like you never forget where you were when you heard this was a really dramatic intervention. But I want to talk a little bit about the timing and the sequencing that comes from that. I'm new to working in India, but I've worked with many, many countries around the world on their decarbonisation strategies. So this is based on my experience from that. So the way to get there is not all sectors of the transport sector moving together, right? Some things you should do early and some things will come later. Economically, it doesn't make sense to do everything together. So the question is, what is the sequencing? And I think it's really important to focus clearly on the measures that have the low cost, high benefits, where you have a lot of degree of confidence. We see the complexity just in this ICE transition discussion, how much complexity is, how much there is uncertainty. But I think that can really be a distraction from taking the early measures that are no regret measures, where you have high confidence. We spoke about behaviour change, maybe promoting walking is kind of a no regret measure. I live in Spain, they just make national 20-mile-an-hour urban speed limits. So I think there's a number of high confidence, no regret measures that you can get on with. And I see a lot, and I'll come back to this at the end, there's a lot of lobby and interest in confusing the discussion and delaying things. And I think really, one message would be to really get a clear, what can you do start with now that is no regret? Other things you need more time, but really get that sequence clearly in your mind. And of course, success breeds success. So I mean, those early successes, things start to work, this breeds success. And of course, then there's many other things that you mentioned already, getting the ministries aligned, getting stakeholders on board, convincing industry, getting a lot of those things further down are easier if you have those early successes. So I think really get that. The second point I wanted to make was about the costs and benefits. And really, I'm taking note of the World Health Organization's recent calculations. The World Health Organization is saying that the costs of tackling climate change are less than the health benefits alone. So just the health benefits globally are greater than the cost of tackling climate change. And if that's true globally, it's certainly true in India. The costs that can be avoided, and I missed that kind of part of the analysis in the presentation by your member of the council. So that's another point I wanted to say. Fourth point is like a word of caution. I've recently seen peer-reviewed science about the short-lived climate impacts of hydrogen leakage. This is really significant. If this turns out to be true, the leakage from hydrogen really has dramatic indirect climate effects. This has important consequences for the use of hydrogen, but particularly in transport. So I think if this is true, we'll probably end up using green hydrogen in industrial applications close to where it's produced. Maybe not. So I really would encourage, I mean, I'm not a climate scientist, so I would really encourage you to get your climate scientists to look at that latest research. Important impacts for the use of hydrogen, particularly in transport. The last point I added was about this whole hybrid EV thing. I worked a lot on the regulation of the car industry in Brussels, making European laws for many years. And one of my takeaways from that part of my career is that things always are cheaper and go faster than the industry are telling you. I mean, often by an order of magnitude. So I really would encourage you to be critical of, this is expensive, it takes a lot of time, retooling, return on investment, all of those arguments. It's always massively faster and massively cheaper than they tell you. So that's my personal experience from regulating in Brussels. Thanks a lot for the discussion.
Thanks very much, Mark. Let me now move to Himani from CEW.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, but this is not working. Thank you. So very quickly, I'll just like to highlight a couple of points. The first one is, given the kind of economy we are continuing to grow for now. So in next 15 to 20 years, the overall demand is still going to increase. So somehow there has to be a bit of more emphasis on the avoid aspect, as in to avoid the vehicle kilometers and keeping as far as possible the demand to be captured in the non-vehicle kilometers. So this is something which is very specific for the passenger demand. Because our travel demand will continue to grow till 2047, and then only it will stabilize given the economy, population and other things. So how can we leverage the 8,000 plus towns and cities that we have, especially the small and medium ones, barring these 250 million plus and big cities? What can we do with the existing small towns and keep them like 15-minute cities or 20-minute cities, so as to ensure that when the growth happens, then a lot of it can be controlled in a non-vehicular transport itself, thus not getting into this aspect. So that is something can only happen when we start on it now, and hence to me that avoid measure speaks much more in the interim, and that holds true for urban logistics, urban freight. So advent of micromobility, wherein you have battery assisted pedelecs and other things, wherein smaller technology inputs are needed, but a lot of demand can be captured quickly and faster. So that's the first point that I wanted to make, and I completely agree with Amit on the focus areas to pick on the bets where the biggest savings will be HDV tractor, and we are very happy to share it's a large HDV or zero emission trucks kind of a mandate that is needed, especially on the sales target side. I think the time is now ripe to move beyond the demand incentives, but to work towards supply side mandates, say sales targets, and that will be something which will be essential to make it very fast for the changes and the transformation to happen. So just these 2 points.
Thanks very much, Himani. Can I move to Sanjeev from the ADV? Sanjeev has to leave, I'm sorry, but I would certainly like to hear you before you go.
Thank you, sir. And sir, great to see you after many years.
Pleasure.
And Mr. Sinha, thank you for having me here. Now, so I am representing ADB's financial sector, so therefore actually more in a listening mode because of the wealth of experience on the technical and the energy side that is here. A very limited point perspective that I have is actually tying to what Pawan was saying earlier on. Anumita made some excellent points, I thought. We all know what to do, what is to be done, but how to do it is where we have to crack the puzzle. And Mr. Sinha knows that we've been trying to address some of the financing issues, innovative financial instruments like credit guarantees, viability gap funding, hedging, etc. But that is where I think something needs to come together very quickly, because that, like the presentations showed, it's a crucial enabler. It's that pillar which will enable all of this to happen. So purely from the financial standpoint, I think what we are missing is one or two things, and since I am still a part of government, so therefore I would like to say this within the four walls of this room. But I think Niti Aayog is doing great work, has taken the leadership, but there are too many moving parts in the government, too many ministries, departments. As far as we are concerned, we find that there is not a single one coherent agency which brings all of this together. So sooner rather than later, one would like to see either a department or an entirely separate mission being created for electric. Just like the team at Niti, we are also right now talking only of electric. But a mission has to be created which will take this forward, so that the roadmap, the policies, the guidelines, the financing aspects, all of that can be brought together, not just the technical aspects and the others. That's one. Second, we've been trying to figure out who would be the right entity for some of the immense financing issues that need to be tackled and where the funds will be raised. We've spoken to banks, and previous CEO Amitabh Kansal guided us towards NBFCs. We've done that, but unfortunately, it's a bit of a frustrating experience till now. And to crack that puzzle, we will need a lot more work done. I would actually go so far as to say that some of the existing agencies I don't want to name here are completely lacking in the bandwidth or the capability that is required for this. Maybe the time has come to think of creating an entirely new vehicle for fundraising, not just domestically, but globally. Cheap funds with the requirement for paying guarantee commissions and all that to government is a small issue. But hedging issues are becoming very important, with natural hedges or things like that. SBI is probably the only one that comes close to doing any of this, but SBI, for obvious reasons, cannot be the entity to do all of this. So a dedicated vehicle that we would like to see come up in the sector that we can interact with as partners. ADB stands ready with a large corpus compared to the standards of our amounts of loans that we give. We are ready to give the funds, but we are trying to put these pieces together and crack on. So a coherent mechanism or an entity, and then a financing agency that we can talk to. And we will keep working at it. And Mr. Sinha and his team, we are working very closely with. We've done a TA for you also on EVs. But I am today purely talking from the financing standpoint. So thank you very much, and we look forward to further guidance.
Excellent point, Sanjeev. Thanks for those. Just before you leave, I think finance is a very important element, but Niti is part of that. And I mean, I don't think we can get very much further unless this gets cracked. Fantastic. Thanks very much, Sanjeev. Let me now turn to the World Bank. My dear friend Gerald. Are you there, Gerald?
Yes, thank you very much. It's good to hear all of you today. I think it's been a very rich conversation. Let me just point to five points. I mean, the first is the scale of the challenge that you're facing is absolutely enormous. When you think of it, the growth in volumes that are going to come from new aspiration, combined with the trends of going towards individualized transport, means you have really a massive increase that can be expected in a do-nothing scenario. And you're trying to reverse both of them. So that's in and of itself really quite a challenging task. I just would like to emphasize, therefore, the value of looking at avoidance of motorized transport where possible. That includes the kind of solutions that OP was describing earlier, as well as integrated transport and land use planning, which at a time where a lot of urbanization is going to take place is really an opportunity to actually change the shape of the cities and reduce future demand for motorized transport in those cities. Second, road sector decarbonization is going to be deeply required. There's no doubt that the level of road transport is going to still dominate by far overall freight and the passenger mode. And while it may be a bit easier to decarbonize passenger transport, freight transport will remain a challenging sector to achieve abatement. Now, two points related to that. One is that as you look at the shift of freight towards railway, one can think about an integrated approach where metropolitan areas are well interconnected with quality rail service, and last mile delivery takes place with electric vehicles. And that's something that really requires a consensus approach working across sectors, but that's something worth pursuing. Next point is that I see the role of buses kind of absent in the diagram that was shown in terms of interurban transport. Because India has currently a low level of personal vehicle penetration, you have an opportunity to actually foster a lot of growth in interurban transport by the private sector, moving towards e-buses in ways that does not require too much financial support, maybe some policy nudge that facilitate the shift towards e-buses by the private operators, some infrastructure, but the rest of it will be mostly covered by the private operators. But doing that now would ensure that you have quality services for interurban transport that are put in place before people make the shift because they don't have a choice. It will take much longer to develop high-speed rail connecting all the cities in India if it happens. So that's really a segment worth pursuing. The numbers actually vary quite widely across sources as to the number of passenger kilometers, anywhere from 25% to 38% going by bus, depending on the estimate. So that also calls for an adjustment in the way statistics are made available systematically. Next point is that when we look at the transformation and we look at countries that have invested massively in their new infrastructure, we know that it goes much beyond investment. A lot of it has to do with reform, pricing, and the like. So for example, just having more railway track doesn't mean that people will shift to railway. The quality of service is not competitive with road transport. So a deep transformation to make the door-to-door solution as competitive and attractive becomes quite necessary. And last point would be regarding the manufacturing story, one needs to keep in mind that any industry that is still stuck in the ICE mode by 2030 will have real difficulty competing internationally. And as you move forward on your manufacturing story, it's an opportunity to be in the forefront as opposed to trying to catch up later on. So there will be quite a lot of opportunities in that segment. And if you don't take it, then it will be very difficult later on to catch up. So that argues in terms of an accelerated pathway towards e-mobility. Thank you.
Thanks, Gerald. Now that Mr. Iyer is here, my request is, as we get closer to the end, I'm getting a longer and longer list. So my request to all the others that I'll call upon, be precise, be quick. I think a lot of the points that you want to make may have been made, so let's sort of go about it quickly. Before Mr. Iyer has to leave for another meeting, we want to hear it. Okay, so let me, Swati from IEA. Swati, quick.
Hello. Thank you. So 2-3 quick points. One, I agree with Anvita. We need to have CAFE norms. We need to update our CAFE norms with how things have gone over the next couple of years. That's one of the easiest and low-hanging fruits to EV penetration. The second part of it is on the financing side, where I think we need to, yes, the financing agency is a point that has come out time and again. So the IEA along with me is doing a study on road transport electrification, and this is one point that has been raised across all stakeholders by us. Also the idea of financing smaller ticket sizes. That is a huge roadblock to electrification despite higher 2- and 3-wheeler penetration. I think I'll stop here because there are too many people, so thank you.
Thanks very much, Swati. Samir from BEE.
There is Samir there.
Swati, can you pass the mic?
Sir, I'm Samir Pandita. I'm looking after e-mobility at Bureau of Energy Efficiency, Ministry of Power. Sir, I've got only one point to make here after having listened to the views across the table. Sir, we have not talked about e-mobility and how we are looking at the expansion of this e-mobility over the next decade, sir. Sir, one thing according to me is, which I perceive is going to be a bottleneck is the upstream charging infrastructure and the investments that are required. Because e-mobility will not be successful, and we have been trying to have this charging infrastructure in place since 2018, when we first came out with a set of guidelines. We have revised those guidelines. We have tried to make tariff affordable for the charging stations as well as for the EV owners. We have brought in a revenue sharing model to share the to make land available for deployment of the charging infrastructure in the country. But I don't think we have made much of a success till now. One of the primary reasons that we have identified is the investments that are required for creation of this upstream charging infrastructure. What we have found out from our studies is that the cost of deploying the charging infrastructure is typically around 60% of the overall cost of setting up a charging station. And most of the entities, even under FAME scheme that we have, Government of India had launched, not much headway has been made, even though about around 3,000 charging stations have been sanctioned. Out of them, currently there is only like 54 charging stations have been deployed.
Good.
So, and one of the major issues which we have come across is the investments in the upstream charging infrastructure. So that part needs to be addressed. And one suggestion is to somehow take care of this cost under the FAME scheme itself. And lastly, sir, we are talking about the electrification of the public transport. Again, charging infrastructure is going to be an issue here. So my humble submission is that this cost should be taken care of under the FAME scheme.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Samir. Can I now call on Ashish from ICLE?
Sir.
As I said, quick points.
Sure. I'll try to be brief. Thank you so much for having us here and sharing and allowing us to listen to all the interesting presentations and points made. Ashish from ICLE, Local Government for Sustainability. We have a cities association, so I'll talk from the point of view of cities. I think we have a range of diverse cities, local contexts that we need to be mindful of. And if we are targeting this transition, we are starting to see some very interesting changes and developments across the country. We need to focus a little bit more on this diversity to see how we can make this transition sustainable. And so I think a lot more studies, pilots are needed so that cross-learning is possible, and what we are starting to say, take seed, becomes something that grows into a major transition that we are able to support in the future. One thing just to add is that as we are starting to strategize and finalize the action plans at the national level, looking at what are the positive developments right now, we should still allow for other possibilities. We should allow for some kind of surprises to ourselves as we are still learning. So that's the only point to be made, to be allowing for, as large projects are being developed, smaller initiatives still that allow us to learn and change course if needed as we move along. That's all. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Ashish. Can I now call on Akanksha from NRDC? Akanksha, you want to come up or use that mic? Yeah.
Thank you. Just to quickly add, thank you sir for this opportunity first of all. My submission is that when we talk about mobility, we are focusing on urban pockets largely, whereas the discussion around rural mobility is vastly missing. Why I say that? It's at a nascent stage, of course, contributes very low to the emissions, but it will require an entirely different systems thinking approach. What works in the urban pockets will not work in the rural pockets, be it technology, policy, and finance. And hence, maybe that's where the discussions also need to start.
Thanks. Good point. Moving to rural, I think great point. Malti from ITF is online. ITF is online. Malti, are
Yes,
you
thank
there?
you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this roundtable. I'll keep this very quick. A lot of great points have been made so far. One point that was brought up was looking at well-to-wheel instead of just the tank-to-wheel component of greenhouse gas emissions. Perhaps taking that a bit further, looking at the life cycle emissions, which include the manufacturing and the disposal of the materials. The infrastructure needs. When you start to look at these, as we are doing right now as part of the NDCTIA project, we start to see some major differences between, let's say, rail-based solutions versus maybe a bus investment, where you might not, looking just at the tank-to-wheel provisions, notice that the greenhouse gas emissions and the energy intensity can actually become quite large. I think my second point on NITI's role is on the importance of good, reliable data. It's something that we have discussed as being a challenge, and it's something that we've, of course, recognized as we're going through the life cycle analysis of India's transport sector. Understanding a baseline activity, whether this is something that Gerald also just brought up on how many passenger kilometers, how many vehicle kilometers are being completed in India would be very helpful. And meta-analysis of different organizations. We all have different models and different baselines assumed. So a cohesive number there would be great. And lastly, just wanted to echo the points on looking at buses, even looking at a life cycle analysis approach. Even diesel buses on a per passenger kilometer basis can perform better than certain electric vehicles, two-wheelers or three-wheelers. These are some preliminary results. Those will be published later in the year. But yes, just to echo some support for considering buses an important part of the avoid and shift component. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Malti. Sanjini from NREL. Sanjini, are you here? Yeah, Sanjini. Very quick points.
Hello. Yeah, so thank you very much for having us here. I'm really excited to hear about all these new possibilities in India. So I think maybe one of the things I just want to, two small points to make is I think the transport sector transition has to be in consideration with the utilities and the energy sector as well. So when we're talking about charging infrastructure, how ready is the grid for all the charging that's coming from whether it's the buses or the heavy duty vehicles or the personal vehicles as well. My second point that I wanted to make was about the potential for skilled labor force creation by understanding the needs of recycling of batteries. So what it takes to extract out the critical materials that are already in there, so we're not wasting that back into the landfill or something like that. So thinking about the recycling component. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thanks very much, Anjali. Last person I'm going to call upon is Patricia from KFW. Patricia, you're online. No?
Arjun from Moana is
there. All right. If you permit, I'll just take a minute and then pass it on to you. But listening to all this, there are just two comments I would like to make. You know, in 1980, we had the first transport policy that came out in the country. And what that policy said is, we would like to see in 20 years, 80% as road, 80% as rail, and 20% as road. What happened 20 years down the line is exactly the opposite. So when the next transport policy committee was set up with Dr. Rakesh Mohan as the chair, I bumped into him at the World Bank and asked him, how are you going to make sure this doesn't happen again? He said, no, I've done a smart thing. I've got all the relevant secretaries to be part of this committee. So I told him, look, secretaries have a bad habit, they retire. So what's the point in getting all of them into that? Because now that's a little bit of a fear I have, and that's where I think NITI has a very important role in making sure that this kind of a policy really gets implemented in the right direction. The second small point I would like to make, picking up from what Anumita said and many others said, everything that we say in this room is pointless unless we can take it out there. And Param is going to say, oh no, not again. But what I will argue is, unless we focus on building capacity amongst the people who are going to do it, it's going to be a conversation in this room and that's it. With this, let me pass it off to both of you. How do you want to? Sudhendu and Param.
May I request Sudhendu sir to now quickly recap everything that has happened since the start of this session? So
in
a couple of minutes, Sudhendu.
Okay, sir, exactly. So precisely in all this entire ecosystem of electric mobility, all of them have given suggestions. The idea is, in fact, it is mainly on three things: that the focus should be more, we should be a little more extensive where we are. We should be extending around, and then as they said that it should be all the more specialized. Precisely, this is what NDCTI stands for. That is the purpose why they are there for. So I am sure that together they would be doing the thing, and they have identified some of the majority of them they have appreciated more than what we deserve. Some of them have also not appreciated a little less than what we deserve. But model they said it's okay. As far as the mission is there, mission is right housed here, working in full blow. You see all statistics, they stand for it. Prime Minister calls it a silent revolution. And the only thing is that now probably that silence needs to be given the words. So that is how we are pulling it forward. The finance piece that has been highlighted is very important. And it was suggested that it's time that we create a new vehicle whereby we are able to generate that fund specially dedicated for this electric mobility. Because naturally, if we start thinking of what would be the resale value, what would be the secondary market, that maturity is still not there. That is needed, sir. And all of them have contributed very significantly, sir, in this entire thing. That is what. Okay.
Thanks, Sudhendu, and thanks, OP and all of you. Sorry I came so late. This is a fascinating topic. I think NITI has done a lot of work with all of you, so but hopefully I can catch up separately on the proceedings. So let me just say a couple of things coming in at this time. I'm really here to learn, and I've been following the proceedings a little bit, and Sudhendu has briefed me, and Siddharth as well. Let me first say that I'm still in learning mode, and people like OP and yourself have probably forgotten much more about urban mobility and the transport sector than I'll ever learn. So, but I'm trying to sort of pick up on the job. And I have to say, in addition to the bad habit of retiring, there's an even worse habit of unretiring. And I'm one of those unretirers, as you know. But look, again, this is a critical sector. And again, NITI has done a lot of work with all of you. A couple of points I wanted to make. One thing which struck me was on decarbonizing transport. And I guess, with this group of experts here, it's a little bit more, maybe we're not at this stage yet. But I was missing two words after status and vision, which is strategy and roadmap, an implementable roadmap, right? So maybe we're not there yet. So what we're really looking for in public policy, in NITI and the government, what are those concrete steps we need to take? I heard the word pilot, and I don't know, somehow, at least in my previous job, we were very allergic to the word pilot. We need to go to scale. And OP and I have had many discussions whether it should be 5,000 or 50,000 or 500,000, etc. I'm talking of e-buses. So I think that would be an important sort of next step on this whenever we are ready for that, because, we need to go to scale. Obviously, we've got to, make sure that we are ready and we have the capacity, as you mentioned. So I think that would be important. Also, somebody spoke about data. So I think, again, whether there are different data sets, we really need to get to, from what I've been told is there is a lot of data out there. Maybe it's not interoperable, if that's the word, but we really need to use that data going forward. It's all about data. It's about technology, of course, but we need to look at that data and see how can it help us kind of leapfrog what other countries are doing. So I think that's one important point. And then again, a lot of discussion, I think, primarily on e-vehicles. What about the, I don't know what, the hard to abate, the heavy road transport, which is still, still going to be there for the bulk of whatever time we're talking about for a long period. And is there a strategy for decarbonizing or reducing carbon coming from heavy transport as well? I think that will be quite important in the mix going forward. But I think the third part I just wanted to mention, I don't know whether it came up in today's discussion, is in behavior, right? And we have been talking, the Prime Minister is talking about a movement called LIFE, which is lifestyle for the environment. And how can individuals and communities contribute to decarbonization and climate-friendly behavior? And OP and I have been talking about it for a while. So, whether it's use of public transport, and when I met OP in Vietnam, I was based in the World Bank in Hanoi, where there are more two-wheelers than anybody can think of, right? And that whole country is running on. And the question there is, what is the incentive for them to switch over to public transport when you're getting such easy mobility and user friendliness from two-wheelers? So, but I think that change in behavior is going to be very, very important as we move towards NDCs and policies, etc. How can individuals change behavior in the transport sector to become more climate friendly? I think that's a sort of missing piece of the puzzle which we need to address. But I think overall, the issue of financing you mentioned, so then there was going to be key. Can there be a separate vehicle for looking at financing, of this whole sector? You're saying what is the resale market? We don't know yet. These are early days. So I guess institutionally, could there be a financing mechanism? I don't know if any ideas have been put about that. But again, something to look at. And I think lastly, we need speed in government, as OP know, and all of you know very well, everything we need yesterday. So how quickly can we move forward with, I'd say, quite a concrete strategy and, implementation to move forward on this agenda? It's going to come up. It's a critical agenda, the whole urban mobility discussion which we have been having. But we need to very quickly move towards action. So let me stop there. For me, it's a learning process. I'm going to find out a little bit more about the proceedings, and hopefully I can learn much more from all of you. But thank you for coming and sharing your very, very valuable opinions. This is clearly a forum of international experts, which we very much welcome. And I think for NITI, let me just finally say, we sort of operate in three buckets. And I think this forum is at the crossroads of at least two of them. The first is we are a national think tank, and we are a little different from traditional think tanks like Brookings or others you might think of, because we both think and do. And cutting edge technology, particularly on climate, is really important for us, and we'd like to partner with organizations which can give us that edge. We are also an instrument for trying to make government more effective, both at the central level, but importantly at the state level. And so whatever we're talking about here, this discourse needs to go down to the states. It shouldn't remain at the national level. So we are reaching out to states in a very proactive way, looking at their whole inclusive growth strategy, at which climate is at the heart of it, and of course mobility and transport is at the heart of that as well. And the third is, we're also here as the Brains Trust. The Prime Minister is the chairman of NITI, and so the think tank role works there as well. So all new ideas which come out, whether it's in e-mobility or any others, is important for NITI. So we have a very good cadre of technical experts. Sudhendu and others have done a marvelous job in NITI, working with all of you. But again, inputs from all of you are very welcome, and our job is to sort of take them in and try to mainstream them into policy, unlock policy bottlenecks. And again, climate and urban transport and decarbonizing it will be at the heart of it. But in the end, we want to move from sort of policy to action. So your help on that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, especially the bit you mentioned about the roadmap. So I have to say, sir, now we've entered the third year of this project, and what you see in front of you, sir, these are about 100+ deliverables, a mix of reports as well as research papers, as well as dialogues and the results of them. So this forms abundant data that is available with us. And so just before we finish this meeting, I wanted to bring your attention to an additional work stream that we've involved as part of this project now, is that we are going to go on ground and do an on-ground assessment of the policies and study them objectively, because we introduce policies, but we haven't really gone on ground and seen what exactly is the impact that they're having. And as part of this, one of our partners, which is International Council for Clean Transportation, their MD Amit Bhatt is here. As part of this, for the FAME scheme, as part of which we put so many e-buses on the road, we went down to Maharashtra, their team went down to Maharashtra, and they did a study right down to the level of the driver and the conductors who are operating these buses, and they've put together an objective assessment, which they wanted to also present to you, sir, as part of this project.
It's part of the NDCTIA project.
Yeah, so I should also tell you that I was for about 6 months the general manager of the UP Road Transport Corporation, where we were struggling to improve mobility in UP. But thanks.
Now, the best thing is, sir, that you are connecting life and mobility together. You see, that is amazing. And the 10 commandments that we have developed for NITI, 2 of them are straight related to mobility, sir. Out of them, 2 of them are straight related to mobility. That means 20% of mobility is what life means. That is what the importance is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Also, sir, wanted to take this opportunity to just let you know we are launching eFast, which is the Freight Accelerator and Sustainable Transport Initiative by Niti Aayog and WRI India, supported by World Economic Forum, RMI, CalSTART, and the launch will happen on 7th. So would request everyone in the room to join, sir, and it will be great to have you come and launch the initiative, which we have got tremendous response from the industry, more than 100+ industry members participating. We'll be talking about their initiative on what they are doing for freight electrification, which is one of the hard to abate sectors. So I think finally we are kicking off that initiative with support from Niti. So just wanted to announce at this August gathering. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah.